Hello, this is Noshad from RSA, and in this video we'll be covering another scenario for the warm standby or secondary server in a NetWitness deployment. In scenario 1 we covered when the primary has a hard fault and would need to be completely reimaged or replaced. In this scenario we're going to assume that the primary is down, but it's not a hard down situation. That is, we are working on the primary or the old primary to fix it and bring it back online and assume the role of primary once again. But the secondary will be running in its place as primary for some period of time. Let's go through the high-level steps and then we will execute them in my lab environment. So again, we are assuming that the primary is down and is not hard down. That is, it doesn't need a reimage. It just may have a network issue. It may have a service issue. Things like that may be need resolution while the secondaries continue to act in the primary role. So with a primary and secondary server set up in my VM environment, we will set up and or validate the sync. In my environment, we'll just validate because I already set it up. My current situation is I have a primary and a secondary, and the primary is replicating its data over to the secondary every night. Then we will mimic a failure of the primary. That is, we'll shut down the network service or bring down a service or something to indicate that there is a fault, but not a hard fault, and that would necessitate us to move the secondary into a primary state. So we would then fail over our secondary as primary running this command. And we'll fill in the IPs and host names there. We'll change the IP and host name on that secondary to be the new primary. And we would not yet reboot. We would then go to the primary server, make it a secondary or standby, change its IP to be the secondary, and then we would reboot both servers. So when they come online after step 4, once they are both online, they will have swapped roles. That is, the secondary is now the primary and the primary is the secondary, but in fact is having service issues, but it is still getting its backup data from the new primary just to stay current with the changes of the environment, so that eventually when it does take back the primary role, it will have accurate data and configuration. We will then resync, right? So I mentioned to make sure that the old primary that is currently at fault continues to get backups. We will set up the resync in the opposite direction. That is from the new primary back to the secondary. Once the primary is fixed, we will rerun the failover commands in reverse order to swap their roles once again and put them back into a state that they were where we first started. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and set up and or validate the sync. I do have a primary and secondary server already pre-set up here. And if you look at my primary server here, you can see that I already ran the original command, which eventually made a cron tab entry to do this sync at midnight UTC. And then if you look at my secondary under var NetWitness standby data, I do have a current backup that just ran a few minutes ago. Now that our cron job is running and I do have a current backup, let's go ahead and go through these steps, and we will run these in parallel before rebooting both boxes because they're going to be swapping IPs upon boot. So let's go ahead and make the secondary our primary and make our primary our secondary. So we're going to go ahead and run this command on our secondary. So we're going to make our secondary as the primary. So let's go ahead and make this one active. So host name, we'll fix that by putting in here prod node 0p, and then the IP is going to be the active one. So 10.10.23.100. Okay, this guy is 101 right now, same subnet as I mentioned in previous videos, and we're going to go ahead and run that. And then we will change the IP and host name once this command is done, and then we will do the standby command on this side and change his IP. This process completed. Let's go ahead and update all of the network configuration before we do a reboot. and we're not going to reboot until we do the primary failover to make it a standby, because they're both going to reboot and come back online with swapped roles. So let's go ahead and replace this guy with 100. So his IP is set. Let's go ahead and update this with the primary host name, and then we'll run the hostname ctl set hostname command with prod node 0p. So this will become our new primary. Let's go ahead and do the same steps on the other server, except we're going to be passing in make standby instead of make active. And by the way, just be patient with this process. You can see it does a lot of extraction, and then it goes through a refreshing, essentially orchestration process. So previous standby NetWitness server, this guy is going to now be prod node 0s. And here we can put an unused IP temporarily, or we could just put the previous IP. I only have the 2 IPs dedicated to this set, so we're going to go and keep this one at 101. Let's go ahead and run this command and allow that to take some time to execute. One of the things you'll notice that it does when you're making it a standby is remove the standby admin data sync cron job, because this will no longer be the primary. So one of our steps after this is going to be to reset up the sync, because we don't know how long this server will be down. So we need it as a backup. We need the backup data from here on this server in the event that we need to fail back, because we eventually expect to fix our primary server, the original one, and bring it back online. So again, the cron job is removed because in a temp state, this is the primary, this is the standby. So now that command ran successfully. So we've made this the standby, made this the active or primary. Let's go ahead and do the same changes to this one to re-host and IP it. So I'm going to make it my secondary IP host. Change the IP to be my standby or secondary host IP. Remember, this one's now the 100. This one's going to be 101. And then we'll run the hostname ctl command on set hostname prod node 0s. And so hostname is S and P, and we've done the configurations that are necessary prior to reboot. So let's just recap where we're at right now. We ran this command with the active IP and active hostname on the secondary to change its configuration to be primary, and then we did the reverse, that is the failover make standby on the primary, the opposite action, and we changed the hostname and IPs respectively to give them their swapped roles. Now we're going to go and reboot. Now that the servers have been rebooted and we have accessibility to them, we can go into the UI. I'm going to log into my primary site. And under admin hosts, you can see everything is green and accessible, and I can investigate my data and manage my environment. Okay. All right. So let's review our steps. So now we've went through this to swap roles. We now have to resync to ensure that our secondary has backup. So note that this is our new primary and this is our new secondary, right? So they're swapped now. And if you look at the cron tab, there's no cron tab entry on either host, of course. On the standby, there's nothing there anyways. So let's go ahead and run our sync command. And on the primary, we're going to put in here the warm standby address, 10.10.23.101. Again, no different than what we did before. This is just making sure that our new primary, right, because this is our secondary now. This was the one that was at fault. This was a previous primary that went in fault. it's still online and we're keeping it online. So this is a kind of a soft fault and we're fixing some issue. Maybe it's a Jetty issue. It could be a variety of other things that are plaguing this particular system that we need to address. So we're going to let this one stay in primary mode. However, because it's going to be used by analysts and administrators, and potentially additions are going to be there, like reporting engine, some configuration changes, so on and so forth. We don't know how long this is going to be down, so we need to set up the sync process. Okay, so we're going to go and we ran the command to set up the sync scheduler. Now that our command ran on the primary, you can see that there is a cron tab entry there, and under my var NetWitness standby data on the standby, I now have a admin server backup, and effectively I am in a good state. That is, my system is back and operational in a primary state and working. My previous primary that is at fault is in standby, so I can work on it and address any issues, right? So now this is where we come to the point where we're going to fix the primary issue. Let's assume that we've done that and all the services are back online. We've validated the health. We're going to go ahead and rerun the failover commands to swap the roles once again. So let's go ahead and do these again. And of course, change IPs and so on and so forth, right? So change IP plus hostname. Then we'll do this on the other machine. And then we'll do change IP plus hostname. And then finally, reboot servers. So let's go ahead and run the first command. This is going to be make active. So we want our standby, which was our soft fault server. We need it to be back to being a primary. And we do have a current backup. This is why it's important to run that sync right away and make sure you're good. So primary node NW server, let's say prod node 0p, and this will become our active IP. So we'll put it at 10.10.23.100. That's the active. While that's running, let's go ahead and make the standby. So previous standby NW server host, 10.10.23.101, and then the unused, we're going to put the host name in here. So we're going to put prod node 0s, and then an unused or previous standby IP address. So in this case, this guy will be 10.10.23.101. And we're going to run both of these commands. This one's going to restore. You can see here that we ran this with 100 to make it back to an active. And this one, we're going to make it standby. So once this process gets done on both servers, we'll change their IPs, we'll swap them, swap the host names again, do a final reboot, and we should be back in the state where we started this video. Now the process has completed on both. Let's go ahead and change the IP and host names on both servers, and then we'll reboot. So this is the standby that is now going to be set to active. So just be mindful of what server you are when you're working this configuration. And we'll change this one to 100. We'll update the host name to P, node 0P, and then do a host name CTL, set host name of node 0 prod node 0P. Let's do the same configuration in reverse order on the other box. So the 100 is actually going to turn into a 101 because we need this back to be a primary. He was originally a primary, or rather a secondary. This was the server that was in a soft fault state. And then we'll do a hostname CTL, set hostname, prod node 0s, and we'll reboot once again. Now the servers have been rebooted and I'm back in my environment. Everything is green. I'm able to investigate. I even have a backup of a test folder I created under my reports directory while I was in standby, and the sync happened back to the primary. So when this one took over, it restored that. So you can see all that is back. And I can investigate my data as well. All those pieces are now working. So now that we're back in the state that we were in previously, let's go ahead and set up the sync from the primary back to the secondary, because if you look under var NetWitness standby of this box, you have nothing there. It's been cleared out. There's no cron tab here either. So let's go ahead and put 23101. This is our standby server. From the primary, we're scheduling a backup to reinitiate the original state that we were in when we started this video. That is my original primary is now syncing its data to the original standby. This one was at fault. We reverted it to standby, made this primary so that we can continue operations. We fixed the issue with the primary and was able to validate its health. Let's assume you did the same. And then we swapped roles once again to make this back to a primary. So again, the last step is that we need to set up the sync operation so that this standby is constantly getting the most up-to-date data daily from this server. And in the unfortunate event that we ever have to do this again, this standby should have a replica of all of the data. While this is happening, let me quickly mention, like in scenario 1, where I posted the video a little while ago, in that case, because the primary is completely had a catastrophic event and you lost the server ID, it will have to be relicensed. In this particular state, because we're going back and forth between the two, and of course I didn't show the licensing steps because it's my lab, but in your environment, because you set up the backup host ID through the steps, what happens is your primary is already licensed on our licensing server. The backup, when you stand it up and go through these steps, you are registering its MAC address, or let's say license server ID, onto our licensing server as well. This initiates that process when you put in this configuration and restart the FlexNet service here. That registers it. So both of the servers are available and can license the services and components that they will be managing. Because the standby could become the primary at any given time, you have no need to worry about licensing at that point because both of these servers are licensed when you go through this step. So again, because we haven't actually lost any server here, we brought this back. All we did is swap roles to facilitate our operational needs. There's no need to mess with licensing. And now we just have a new copy. So we validated that our old node 0s, which is a standby, now has a current copy of the backup. And we have a scheduled backup running every day at midnight UTC. So you should be back in an operational state at this point. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it below. I hope you enjoyed this video.